It was supposed to be the start of a new chapter for Leila. After years of hard work and sacrifices, she and her son, Ethan, had finally found their dream home in a picturesque suburban neighborhood. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the quiet cul-de-sac, and the trees lined the streets like silent guardians, their leaves swaying gently in the breeze. The house was everything they had hoped for: spacious, charming, and nestled away from the chaos of the city. It was their sanctuary, a place where they could rebuild and start fresh. But that peace was shattered the moment the letter arrived. Leila sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee, when she noticed the heavy envelope that had been wedged under the front door. It was a thick, official-looking envelope, embossed with the insignia of the neighborhood's Homeowners Association, the HOA. She hesitated for a moment before tearing it open, curious but unprepared for what was inside. The letter was typed in cold, sterile font, with no hint of warmth or welcome. It outlined a list of supposed violations, minor infractions that seemed petty at best, absurd at worst. The first, violation of community aesthetic standards, unapproved color of the front door. The second, failure to maintain acceptable lawn height. And the third, excessive holiday decorations beyond prescribed limits. Lila's eyes scanned the words, confusion swirling in her mind. These weren't serious offenses, just trivialities meant to make someone uncomfortable. Her fingers tightened around the letter, a flicker of unease crawling up her spine. She had only just moved in. How could they possibly know her home so intimately already? She stood and walked to the front window, peering out at the quiet street. Everything appeared peaceful, normal. But the HOA's demands, there was something more to them, something unsettling. That's when she saw him. Standing across the street, near the mailbox, was a man in a dark suit. He wasn't looking at the house, but at the street, his eyes scanning, sharp and purposeful. He was tall, well-built, with a posture that spoke of someone used to authority. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her, but she didn't know why. Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickly pulled back from the window, feeling an inexplicable chill settle over her. It could have been nothing. Just a neighbor, perhaps. But then again, who was that watching so intently from across the street? Was this a coincidence? The doorbell rang, snapping Leila from her thoughts. She jumped slightly, startled by the unexpected intrusion. She opened the door, her mind racing. Standing there was a man in his mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a button-down shirt and khakis, with a tight-lipped smile that felt more like a warning than a greeting. He extended a hand. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Williams. I'm Charles Delaney, the president of the Homeowners Association," he said, his voice smooth but with an underlying edge of authority. Leila hesitated, her gaze flicking back to the street, but she quickly shook his hand. "Hello," she replied, forcing a smile. "What can I do for you?" "I'm just here to inform you about a few concerns we've had with your property. As you know, we take our community standards very seriously." He handed her another letter, this one in an envelope with the same emblem. Leila took it, her unease growing. "I wasn't aware of any concerns. I just moved in," she said, trying to remain calm. "Well, you see," Charles said, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly, "some things have already been noted, and we expect you to correct them immediately. The HOA has rules, Mrs. Williams, and we like to ensure they're followed. People like you, newcomers, sometimes need a little more time to adjust." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "We'll be keeping a close eye on things." Leila's stomach twisted. She forced herself to smile. "I'll take care of it." As she closed the door behind him, the unsettling feeling grew stronger. Was it just a coincidence that she was the target of the HOA's scrutiny? Or was there something more sinister at play? And what about the man across the street? Was he connected to this somehow? Leila couldn't shake the growing sense that her new life had just become far more complicated and dangerous than she ever imagined. The next few days passed in a blur, the tension from the HOA's initial visit hanging over Leila like a storm cloud. The letter they'd left had been clear, almost too clear, about their expectations, as if she were already under a microscope. Every time she stepped outside, she couldn't help but feel as though invisible eyes were watching, scrutinizing her every move. It was early afternoon when the doorbell rang again. Lila wasn't expecting anyone, but her instincts told her that whoever was on the other side of that door had nothing good to offer. She opened it cautiously. Standing in the doorway was Charles Delaney, the HOA president, looking every bit the polished professional he had the other day. But today there was something different in his eyes, something colder. He wasn't here to be friendly. He wasn't here to explain. "Mrs. Williams," he said with a tight smile, "I hope you've had time to review the notices. I'm here for a follow-up inspection. I trust you've made the necessary adjustments." Lila's heart skipped a beat. An inspection? She hadn't done a thing. The absurdities in the letter seemed harmless at first, but now, with his formal tone, it felt like a full-blown power play. Her eyes flicked nervously toward her front yard, the overgrown ivy that had been there when they moved in. The mailbox that wasn't perfectly symmetrical with her neighbor's. Nothing serious. Just small imperfections. I haven't gotten to it yet. I was planning to." She began, but he cut her off with a gesture. "That's unfortunate. The HOA operates under strict guidelines, Mrs. Williams. These aren't just suggestions. They're rules." His voice dropped, becoming low and insistent. "You'll find that it's in your best interest to follow them." His eyes locked with hers, his gaze piercing. He wasn't just talking about home maintenance anymore. It felt like a warning, like he was trying to make her feel small, insignificant. Lila forced a smile, her pulse quickening. "I'll take care of it soon," she said, trying to remain polite. But inside, something twisted. The polite facade was slipping away, and a bitter taste lingered in her mouth. Charles took a slow step forward, his presence intimidating, like a predator circling its prey. "Good," he said, his tone deliberately drawn out. "But you should know, Mrs. Williams, there are consequences for failing to comply. The HOA doesn't just fine residents. We take more drastic measures when necessary." Lila's throat tightened, but she tried to hold her ground. "I'm sure it won't come to that," she said, her voice slightly shaky. "Oh, it often does. People don't think we'll follow through until it's too late," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'd hate for you to be the exception." He turned to leave, but before he did, he glanced over his shoulder with a final parting remark. "You don't want to get on the wrong side of the HOA, Mrs. Williams. Trust me." The door clicked shut, and Lila stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. Her stomach churned. The subtle threat in his voice echoed in her ears. What did he mean by drastic measures? The words lingered, filling the room with a suffocating air of dread. The HOA wasn't just a neighborhood association. It was a shadowy entity with too much power, too much control. And Lila had no idea how deep their reach extended. Lila felt a chill crawl up her spine, and she couldn't shake the image of Charles' piercing eyes, as if he knew something about her that she didn't. It was clear now. This wasn't just about a few rules. There was something personal about this. Something far more dangerous. Her mind flashed back to the man she'd seen across the street the other day. He hadn't just been standing there. He'd been watching her. Was he connected to Charles? Was he part of the HOA's web? And why her? What had she done to warrant such attention? The questions gnawed at her, but before she could process them, a knock sounded at the door again. She turned, her heart hammering. Who now? She cautiously opened the door to find her son's bodyguard, Jake, standing on the doorstep. His jaw was clenched, his expression unreadable. "Lila," he said in a low voice, his eyes scanning the street before locking onto her. "We need to talk." The unease in his tone sent a jolt through her. Jake was never this serious. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're not just watching you," he said, his gaze sharp and calculating. They've been watching us. Leela's heart pounded in her chest as she ushered Jake inside, the weight of his words sinking in. They've been watching us. She led him into the living room, her hands trembling slightly as she motioned for him to sit. Jake, a man of few words, barely acknowledged the gesture as he took a seat, his eyes still scanning the street through the window, vigilant and cautious. Leela couldn't hide the anxiety in her voice. What do you mean? They've been watching us. Jake's sharp gaze finally settled on her. I mean exactly what I said. The HOA's not just keeping tabs on your property. They're digging into your past, your family's history. They've been gathering information on you. And it's not just about your lawn or the color of your mailbox. Leela's stomach twisted. She had always kept her private life private. No flashy history, no skeletons in the closet. But suddenly, the air in the room felt thick with suspicion. But I haven't done anything wrong. They can't. Jake interrupted her with a raised hand. It's not about what you've done, Leila. It's about what they think you might do. His voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible. I've seen this before. The HOA is never just about community rules. They make their own rules, and they will do whatever it takes to control people like you. She was silent for a moment, trying to process his words. But why? What's their endgame? Jake's jaw clenched, his eyes darkening. Power. Control. They've been doing this for years, pushing around people they think they can intimidate. They've ruined businesses, driven families out of their homes, destroyed reputations, and now they've set their sights on you. They don't like newcomers, especially ones with resources. He paused, leaning forward, his voice low and menacing. They think you're easy prey. Leela's mind raced. She had only just moved in, and already the HOA had launched an all-out attack. They had made it personal, and she didn't understand why. Are you telling me they're going after my family? She asked, the realization hitting her hard. Jake's eyes hardened. They're already going after you, Leila. This isn't just about your house anymore. It's about everything you represent. You've got a target on your back. The blood drained from her face as the weight of the situation sank in. What had she gotten herself into? How had things spiraled so quickly? She wasn't just dealing with a few petty rules anymore. This was something far more dangerous, something personal. I don't know what to do, she whispered, feeling her strength slipping away. I thought I could handle this, but it's like they're everywhere. Watching, waiting. Jake stood abruptly, his eyes locked on the door. You need to be careful, Lila. Don't think you're just fighting a few homeowners. The HOA has resources, connections. They'll play dirty. I've seen them ruin lives. And right now, they're playing their game with you as their next target. Leela stared at him, the fear that had been building inside her now turning into something colder. She had always been strong, always kept a calm facade, but now she was questioning everything. What had she walked into? Is there a way to fight back? She asked, her voice tinged with desperation. Jake hesitated for a moment, his gaze distant. There is, but it's dangerous. The way they operate, it's not just about a legal battle or a public fight. You'd have to get down into the dirt with them, play their game. And that's not something you can back out of once you're in. The implications of his words hung in the air like a thick fog. Lila didn't know whether to feel empowered or terrified. Could she really take them on? But Jake's next words were the most unsettling of all. They're not just watching your property, Lila. They've got people everywhere. People in your life you wouldn't expect. Lila's pulse quickened. What do you mean? I mean, Jake said, leaning in, his voice dropping to a whisper. They've got someone on the inside. Someone who's been feeding them information. The air in the room seemed to freeze, and Lila's breath caught in her throat. Who? Who could be helping them? I'll find out who it is, Jake continued, his voice steely with resolve. But you need to stay alert. Trust no one. Lila stood in the living room, her heart pounding in her chest as Jake's words echoed in her mind. Someone close to her. The thought gnawed at her insides like a slow-burning fire. Who could be working with the HOA? Who in her life could betray her so deeply? The room felt suddenly smaller, as if the walls were closing in around her. Every shadow seemed darker now, every sound sharper. The house that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a trap. Jake's eyes were fixed on her, watching her reaction carefully. You're going to have to think carefully, Layla. Everyone around you could be a potential threat. The HOA plays a game of manipulation. They get inside your head, make you feel like you're losing control, and then they strike when you least expect it. Leela shook her head, trying to clear the fog of confusion clouding her mind. But who could it be? I've only just moved here. I don't know anyone well enough for them to have any leverage over me. Jake exhaled, frustration lining his features. You don't get it, do you? The HOA doesn't need leverage. They don't need a long history with you. They target people who don't fall in line, people who have resources or potential, people who stand out. And they will use anyone, to get what they want. His words hit her like a slap. Anyone. The fear that had been creeping through her veins now surged into panic. She wasn't just fighting a faceless bureaucracy. She was facing an enemy that could invade her life, twist her world, and turn the people she trusted into enemies. Her mind flashed to the people she'd met since moving in. The overly friendly neighbor, Mrs. Galloway, who always seemed to be watching from her porch. The young couple 2 houses down who offered unsolicited advice on neighborhood politics. Even the kind man at the local coffee shop who'd seemed so eager to help her settle in. Could one of them be working with the HOA? Leela's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. She jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. Jake's eyes flicked to the window. Stay low, he whispered, his tone urgent. Don't open the door unless you know who it is. Leela's pulse raced as she moved toward the peephole, trying to see through the frosted glass. For a split second, all she could make out was a silhouette. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, standing on the other side. The knock came again, louder this time, persistent. Not another HOA representative, Leela thought, feeling a wave of dread wash over her. With shaky hands, she cracked the door open just enough to peer through. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw who it was. It was the man she had seen across the street, the one in the dark suit. He was standing there, his cold eyes locking onto hers, a thin smile playing at the corners of his lips. Mrs. Williams, he said, his voice smooth, almost mocking. We need to talk. Leela's mind raced. What now? She hesitated but didn't let the fear take over. Her voice was steadier than she felt. I told your colleague Charles everything would be handled. The man's smile widened. This isn't about your house, Mrs. Williams. It's about you. About your potential. He paused, letting the word hang in the air. You're a problem, you see, and problems need to be dealt with. Leela's stomach churned. What do you mean? I'm not a problem. Oh, but you are, he replied, his eyes glinting with something dark. You're not like the others, and that makes you a threat to the system, to the way things are. Leela's mind was reeling, the pieces of the puzzle slowly coming together but still shrouded in shadow. She didn't understand what he was implying, but she could feel the coldness in his words. The system. What system? The man leaned closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. But we're reasonable. If you comply, things can go smoothly. If not, well, we can always make an example out of someone. The HOA isn't the only power in this neighborhood, Mrs. Williams. The weight of his words landed like a punch to her chest. This wasn't just about rules. This was about control, power. Before she could respond, he straightened up, glancing past her into the house, as if inspecting her very soul. I'll be watching, Mrs. Williams. We all will be. With that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the quiet street. Leela stood frozen in the doorway, her body tense, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She hadn't even had the chance to ask him what he meant by making an example. What was the HOA really after? Jake stepped forward from where he had been watching the encounter from the shadows of the hallway. "They just sent a message," he muttered darkly. "And it's not one you want to ignore." The man in the suit didn't leave Leela's thoughts for the rest of the day. His words echoed in her mind like a haunting melody, growing louder with each passing hour. "We can always make an example out of someone." What did that mean? Was it an empty threat or something more sinister? Leela's eyes flitted to the clock on the wall. It was well into the evening now, the dim glow of streetlights casting long shadows over the front yard. She hadn't felt safe in her own home in days, but the feeling of being hunted was starting to sink in, a slow, creeping dread that clawed at her every move. Jake had promised he would get to the bottom of it, but every second she spent alone made her more aware of how vulnerable she was. She knew the HOA had been gathering information on her, but how far did their reach go? What if they were more than just a neighborhood association? What if they were part of something larger, something even darker? A sudden noise outside snapped her out of her thoughts, the rustle of movement near her window. Leela's heart skipped a beat, and her breath caught in her throat. She moved quickly to the window and peered through the blinds. There, in the shadows, a figure stood, motionless, watching her house. A chill ran down her spine. She couldn't see the person's face, but the silhouette was unmistakable, the same broad-shouldered man she had seen earlier. Her pulse quickened as she backed away from the window, her mind racing. Why was he back? Was he watching her again? Or had he come for something more? A knock on the door shattered the silence, and Leela froze, her stomach churning. The last time someone had knocked, it had been the man in the suit. She wasn't about to let him intimidate her again. But what if this time it wasn't him? What if it was someone who could help? She moved slowly to the door, glancing back once more through the peephole. This time, it wasn't the man in the suit. It was someone she recognized. Mrs. Galloway, the neighbor who had been overly friendly since Leela moved in. Leela hesitated. Something about the way Mrs. Galloway stood there, her posture tense, made Lila's gut twist. Why is she here? Taking a deep breath, Leela opened the door just enough to peer out. "Mrs. Galloway," Leela said cautiously, "what's going on?" The older woman's eyes flickered nervously, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I was just checking in," she said, her voice tight, as if she were forcing the words out. "I heard some noise earlier and wanted to make sure everything was all right." Leela narrowed her eyes, not buying the act for a second. "I'm fine," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "But thank you for checking in." Mrs. Galloway didn't move. Instead, she leaned in a little closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You need to be careful, dear. They're not just watching you. They're in your life now. And they won't stop until they get what they want." Leela's stomach tightened. The warning was clear, but Mrs. Galloway's words only raised more questions. Who was she really? Was she trying to help, or was she part of the twisted web the HOA had spun? Before Leela could respond, Mrs. Galloway quickly stepped back, her expression flickering with unease. "Just be careful," she said hastily, and then she was gone, disappearing into the night as if she'd never been there. Leela stood frozen in the doorway, her mind whirling. What had just happened? What was Mrs. Galloway trying to say? And why had she left so abruptly? There was no time to dwell on that now. The man in the suit was still out there. He was watching her, and no one was safe, not even the people she thought she could trust. Leela's phone buzzed, jolting her back to reality. She snatched it from the table, her eyes quickly scanning the message. It was from Jake. "I know who the inside man is. Meet me at the park." Now, her breath caught in her throat. The insider. The betrayal. This was it. Everything was about to come to light, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. But she had no choice. She grabbed her coat, her heart racing. The truth was just within reach. The park was eerily quiet as Leila pulled up, her headlights slicing through the fog that seemed to have settled over the town. It was well past midnight now, and the world around her felt as though it had gone to sleep, except for the haunting knowledge that something far darker was awake and moving in the shadows. She scanned the area, but there was no sign of Jake. No sign of anyone, really. Just the quiet whisper of wind through the trees and the distant chirping of crickets. Lila stepped out of her car, her nerves on edge. Every step felt like it was echoing in the silence, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, her eyes darting across the empty park. Where was Jake? A faint movement near the swings caught her attention, and Lila's breath hitched in her throat. There in the dark was a figure, tall, cloaked in shadow, but unmistakably Jake. She hurried toward him, her footsteps quick and cautious. "Jake," she called out, her voice shaky. The figure turned, and she exhaled in relief when she saw his familiar face. His expression, however, was as grim as ever. "You made it," he said, his voice low. He looked over his shoulder, as if checking to make sure they weren't being followed. "We need to talk, but not here. It's not safe." Lila's heart raced again. Not safe. Her mind immediately went back to the man in the suit, the cryptic warning from Mrs. Galloway, and the insider in her life. How deep did this go? Was she standing on the edge of something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined? Jake led her to a secluded spot by the trees, away from any potential prying eyes. He glanced around one more time before speaking. "I've got the name of the insider," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And it's worse than we thought. They've been planning this for months, maybe even longer. The HOA isn't just targeting you, Lila. They've been watching everyone in this neighborhood. But you're the key." Lila's mind whirled, her breath coming faster as Jake's words hit her. "What do you mean, I'm the key?" He paused, his eyes dark and filled with something that resembled regret. The HOA doesn't just want control over the neighborhood. They want leverage, and you're the leverage. You have something they want, something they can use to control the entire area. Lila's pulse raced as she struggled to process what Jake was saying. "I don't understand," she murmured. "What could they possibly want from me? I'm just trying to live my life, to get away from all the chaos." Jake exhaled sharply, his frustration palpable. "It's not that simple. You don't just move into a neighborhood like this and not attract attention. You've got resources, something the HOA wants, and they're willing to do anything to get their hands on it. They'll use your family, your reputation, anything they can." The weight of his words sank in like a heavy stone. Lila felt the walls around her tighten, her breath becoming shallow. Was this really happening? Was this all just a ploy? "But who's the insider?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. "Who's feeding them information about me? About us?" Jake's eyes narrowed. "It's someone close. Someone you trust." Lila's stomach dropped. "Someone I trust." The realization hit her like a punch in the gut. Was it Mrs. Galloway, the overly friendly neighbor, or maybe someone else? Someone she had let into her life too quickly. Before Lila could process any more of the bombshells Jake had just dropped, a sudden noise interrupted their conversation. A rustling in the bushes nearby. Jake's eyes snapped toward the sound, his body tensing. "Get down," he whispered urgently, pushing Lila behind a tree. Lila crouched down, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the cold sweat on her brow, could hear the faintest shuffle of footsteps approaching. She held her breath, trying to make herself as small as possible, her mind racing. Who was it? The sound grew louder, closer. Then, through the trees, a figure emerged, a man in a dark suit, the same one who had visited her house earlier. Lila's blood ran cold. Why was he here? The man paused a few feet away from where they were hiding, his eyes scanning the area with cold, calculating precision. He didn't seem to notice them at first, but as his gaze swept the park, his eyes narrowed, as if sensing something amiss. Jake's hand shot out, grabbing Layla's arm. "Stay quiet. Stay still." The man turned and began to walk away. But just before he disappeared into the darkness, he glanced back once more, his eyes locking onto Layla's hiding place. His lips curled into a knowing smile. "I see you," he muttered under his breath. Layla's heart skipped a beat. He knew. Layla didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with trembling hands and wide, haunted eyes. The image of the suited man's smile, cold and knowing, was burned into her mind. He saw her. He knew she was there. And worse, he had let her go. Why? Jake paced back and forth across the kitchen, his brow furrowed and jaw clenched. He's playing a game. A psychological one. He wants you rattled. Wants you paranoid. That's how they break people down before moving in for the kill. Leela's fingers curled around the edge of her coffee mug. "And it's working," she whispered. "Jake, you said you knew who the insider was. Tell me." Jake stopped pacing. His eyes locked on hers, filled with reluctance and a flicker of pain. "I didn't want to believe it at first," he said. "I checked every phone log, security cam, even intercepted a few of the HOA's private messages. It all led back to one person." Leela stared, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Jake took a deep breath. "It's your son's therapist, Dr. Meyer." The room went deathly still. "No," Leela breathed. "That's not possible. He's been with us for almost a year. He helped my son through the worst trauma of his life. He's family." Jake's voice was low, steady. "And that's exactly why they chose him. He had access to everything. Schedules, mental records, even your security code. He doesn't work for the HOA directly, but he's being blackmailed, leverage, probably with his own past." Layla's world tilted. Dr. Meyer. She had trusted him with everything. Her fears, her hopes, her son's healing. The betrayal stung like a knife through the heart. "Why would the HOA go that far?" she whispered. "Why target my son?" Jake's expression darkened. "Because you're not the target. He is." Leela blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" Jake pulled out a tablet and turned the screen toward her. "You ever wondered why your son needed a bodyguard in the first place? Why your late husband insisted on it before the accident?" Leela nodded slowly. "Because of a threat from his business, something about a patent." Jake nodded grimly. "That patent wasn't just business. It was a defense protocol. A next-gen system capable of disabling advanced surveillance grids, like the one the HOA uses to control this neighborhood. Your husband tried to keep it quiet, but word got out. Your son holds the encryption key, probably without even knowing it." Leela's stomach turned. "So this isn't about the HOA at all?" "It's bigger," Jake said. "The HOA is just the front. A shell organization. They've embedded themselves into neighborhoods across the country, watching, waiting, collecting power. Your son is a threat to their entire operation." Leela felt the floor vanish beneath her. Everything made sense now. The surveillance, the veiled threats, the staged violations, the man in the suit. They weren't trying to bully her into compliance. They were setting the stage to take her son. And then her phone buzzed. A single message flashed on the screen. "We're coming for the boy. You have 1 hour to cooperate. No more warnings." Leela's fingers clenched around the phone. Her fear turned to fury. "No more running," she said through gritted teeth. "It's time to fight back." Rain poured from the sky like the heavens themselves were warning her. Lightning forked in the distance, briefly illuminating the house as Leela stood in her living room, staring at the glowing message on her phone. "We're coming for the boy. You have 1 hour to cooperate. No more warnings." Her son slept upstairs, unaware of the storm outside, or the storm about to crash through their door. Leela's hands were no longer shaking. Something inside her had snapped. The fear that had gripped her heart for weeks was gone, burned away by something far fiercer. Resolve. She turned to Jake, who was already assembling gear with clinical precision. Earpiece, sidearm, tactical vest, a small black case with blinking blue lights. "They'll come through the back or the side gate," Jake said, not looking up. "They'll avoid the front. They think I've left the house." "Let them come," Leila said coldly. "They're walking into a trap." Jake arched a brow. "You sure you're ready for this?" She nodded. "They made me feel hunted in my own home. Now it's their turn." 30 minutes later, the house was a fortress. Jake had patched into the neighborhood's private surveillance grid, using the very system the HOA relied on for control, and rerouted the feeds. The cameras were now theirs. And that's when the van arrived. Black, unmarked, quiet as a ghost. It rolled up without headlights, parking 2 houses down. 5 figures emerge, all in dark tactical gear, weapons in hand. Jake watched them through the thermal scope. "They're not HOA," he muttered. "These are professionals." Leila didn't flinch. "Then we make an example out of them." The intruders split up, 2 heading for the side entrance, 1 scaling the fence toward the backyard, and 2 approaching the utility hatch in the alley behind the house. The coordination was flawless. But Jake was faster. With a tap on his tablet, hidden floodlights on the perimeter flared to life. Blinding white. The men near the fence stumbled, cursing, their positions exposed. That was all Jake needed. He opened the side door, stepped out like a shadow, and dropped the first man with a silenced dart to the neck. Leila, watching through the interior monitors, saw another figure creeping through the kitchen window. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the blunt baton Jake had left her and waited. As the man slipped through the window, she stepped out from behind the curtain and struck, once, twice, until he dropped to the floor with a thud. But it wasn't over. From upstairs came a soft click. The bedroom door. Leila's eyes snapped upward. Her son. She bolted up the stairs and threw the door open, and froze. The man in the suit stood at the foot of her son's bed, holding the boy's wrist gently, almost fatherly. "You were warned," he said, voice like silk over razors. Behind him, the bodyguard, silent until now, stepped out of the shadows, pistol raised. "Step away," the bodyguard growled. The man in the suit didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled. "It's too late. The key's been activated." "What key?" Leila demanded. The man turned to her slowly. "Your son just unlocked the system. We have everything we need." But before he could move, the bodyguard fired. Twice. The man staggered, collapsed, blood seeping into the carpet. Silence. Jake burst into the room seconds later. "It's done," he panted. "Their uplinks fried. I crashed the entire HOA grid. They're blind." Leila knelt by her son, who stirred slowly. His eyes fluttered open. "Mom," he whispered. She pulled him close, trembling now that the adrenaline had passed. "It's okay, baby. It's over."